The following is from the Agency for Instructional Technology, AIT.
Drawing the human figure is perhaps one of the oldest traditions in art. In this program, Paul will demonstrate and give many suggestions for drawing the human body.
I'm sketching a figure here. I'm making a line. Here's the top of the head, and here's the bottom of the foot. Now, I'm going to draw the parts of the body within there. I know that on an adult figure, about halfway, judge with your eye, is the hip block. So I can use that mark for the hip block. Then I can divide the upper part into 4 parts. This top would be the head. Then I can place the hip block here, the rib cage up here, and these are only suggestions. I can refine them later. And the upper leg, and now the upper arm, and the elbow breaks at the waist, the lower arm, the wrist breaks at the hip bone, and we have a system of measurements. All people will not look exactly like this, but that's a standard we use, and if we're drawing a particular person, we see the difference in that standard. There's a proportion but unrefined drawing of a figure, an adult figure, about 8 heads tall. The parts, the rib cage, the hip block, the upper leg, the lower leg, the upper arm, the lower arm, and the head. Now after I have the proportions, next I can come around and put in detail such as hairstyle, clothing, and continually refining the figure and the shape. Going on to completing the figure. Regardless of the system you use, there's 3 things to remember when you're drawing a figure. If you're drawing a figure without benefit of model, as we are drawing here. First, the parts of the body. And second, how they move. And third is proportion. And that's very important. Proportion means the relationship of one part of the body to another. Now, if we draw a side view of this figure, our vertical proportions are going to be the same. Be half here to the hip block. Then we can divide this into 4 units. And let's just take this one in half because we don't need any. So in drawing here, the head will occupy the same amount, the skull. Top of the rib cage, and the bottom of the rib cage, and the hip block. All of the vertical proportions are the same. The only difference is the width of the body, because at a side view, the rib cage and the hip block are narrow. And I'm putting in the arms here, they'll break at the elbow. The wrist breaks at the hip bone. So you have the same proportions, but the width is different. Then you can go on and refine, adjust the shape, adjust the lines, but laying it out is the most important part of drawing a figure. From a standing position to a walking or running position, the body moves this way. First, you lean forward, and your point of balance is under the chin. So you must bring a foot up to catch yourself, or you'd fall on your face. Now, if you're running, you simply lean further forward, and the arms and the feet on the same side always work in opposite direction, always. And as running, your feet are simply further apart, and the motion of your arms is much greater. There are several approaches to drawing. Here I use the construction approach. I could use a gestural approach. The proportions remain the same, so I can divide my figure the same way. The only difference is, instead of the geometric forms, I use a loose lines. And of course they will not be perfect at first. I'm just feeling the proportions of the body. But I'll still remember to break the elbow at the waist and the wrist at the hip bone. And after I do that, I can come back and outline it and finish it. Another approach would be the tonal, where I simply use tones to represent the parts of the body. But remember, the proportions remain the same. After I have the tones here, as in a gestural approach, then I come in with outline and say, here would be the head. And the tones are just better than nothing. They give me some feeling of solidity. Rib cage. I need not follow them exactly. They're just helps. And here's the hip block. And as I come around with the outline drawing, now I'm cutting the shapes that I remember. And here I move in here because the shape's too far. Elbow at the waist, wrist at the hip bone. So you have a construction approach, a gestural approach with the outline not put in there, a suggestion of a tonal approach, and then we come in and use an outline approach on all of them to cut the shapes that we want. Here's a suggestion for drawing figures in various positions, and in this case, a person seated on a chair. I suggest you draw the chair first. It's easier. Once you have the chair drawn, then the next step, I would say, is draw the hip block, side view. Then you can draw the rib cage and suggest the head. Now come down here and you have the upper leg. Upper leg, side view. Lower leg, side view. Now, the upper arm, side view, it'll still break at the waist, and the lower arm and the hand resting on the knee. So the proportions will remain the same as in the other drawings. The difference is in the procedure. We start with the chair and have the figure fit the chair. And you come down here and then you can put in the features. But the chair first. Now, if you have other figures, suggestions of a person probably, say, seated on the floor, same thing is true. You can draw the hip block first. You can draw the rib cage. A suggestion for the head. Now, the upper leg here, and the lower leg be here. Upper arm here, and lower arm. Person here would be holding the knee. The foot would be hid behind this one. But you have a similar situation. Here you had the chair, here you have the floor. And upper arm, lower arm on the far away side. Any action you wish. Now if you have the proportions and you're satisfied with them, then you can move into outlining and detailing and getting more of the shapes that you want. But that's the procedure. We start that way. In both cases, with whatever we were resting on, and we drew the figure around them. And I finished by outlining and refining the shapes.
On your own, try drawing a figure, standing or seated. First, determine where the top of the head will be, then the feet, and then the hip section. Think about the various parts of the body and their shape. Remember where joints enable a limb to bend.
Now what about in children? Some children are maybe 1, 2, 3, 3.5 heads tall. The younger they are, the larger the head is in proportion to the body. And here's a person, a little fellow about 3 years old. He'd be about 3.5 heads. And a person maybe 4 years old, maybe 4 heads.
Figure drawing is not difficult if you take it in a series of small steps. First, determine the height of the figure and make a simple guide to place the major features of the figure, its hip, head, and joints. Practice using any number of approaches, from the loosest gestural line to the studied construction form. Drawing with Paul Ringler is produced by the Agency for Instructional Technology in association with the Oklahoma Educational Television Authority.